getting his questions ready, I have two relatively innocent questions I'd like to ask our witness. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You were describing the process of the photography and using the computer and particularly the visual box of the TV. Is it possible to make videotapes of the computer's activity on that video screen, similar to what you can do in home TV cassettes?
The answer to that is yes, but you have to use a different type of videotaping system than you would find in a regular off-the-shelf thing you could buy from your local electronics store, for example. The reason for that is that to produce a higher quality display on the TV sets that we use for computer enhancement, we use a different electronic format for the creation of the image on the TV tube than the electronic format which is used in commercial broadcast television standards. So you would have to have a box, so to speak, which is suited for the electronic standards of our TV display rather than the electronic standards of commercial broadcast television.
Okay. Just one other question. I wonder if we could have put up on display the pictures that you enhanced looking at the figure on the corner of the wall in the grassy knoll that looks like a person.
Okay, that would be Willis number 5, I guess is the, and I don't know the exhibit number.
And also the picture of the bush and the hat.
Okay. Zapruder frame 413, that would be.
I'll be done in a second.
That's one of the retaining wall photos. Is that the one you were interested in?
Yes. This one's the one I'm particularly interested in your description, and we had also a chart up there of the fact that that hat was probably somewhere near the steps and the bush was closer to Zapruder, I believe, when he took that picture. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Yes, put that up. The question is a relatively innocent one. It seems to me that we had some pictures of Zapruder taking the famous film. Did you analyze or look at any of those pictures to see if there's anyone with that kind of a hat standing anywhere near the steps?
First of all, what you perceive as a hat, the panel did not conclude was a hat. We concluded there's not an individual with a hat there, but what you see, the perception of a hat with the brim turned down is actually a just coincidental appearance of leaves in that bush near the edge of the head in such a way that it looks like the brim of a hat. Now, with respect to...
But there is a head under that leaf.
There is a head under there. There is definitely a head, and you can tell that, for example, from some of the pink flesh tones on the ears and the back of the neck when you look at them on a computer display.
Well, this is the question.
Now, the actual head there itself, you can see, for example, in the picture which Ms. Downey just put up, 3 individuals standing on the steps there. All 3 of them appear to be fair-haired or with hair cropped short or perhaps balding or beginning to balding, which would be very much the same perception you would receive from looking at this individual's head, which is seen in Zapruder 413, namely that of a balding or fair-haired individual with the hair cropped short.
I just wanted to make clear on the record that there were some people standing
Yes.
in the proximity of where you suggest someone might have been standing to cause the optical illusion that appears that the gentleman or person is in the bushes.
That's correct. In fact, they appear to be standing just about on the steps where that line that I drew in the survey map would indicate that on a distance measurement from the geometry of the imagery that they would have to be.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Fithian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Hunt, just theoretically, or hypothetically, if someone in your profession, someone with your talents, wanted to arrive at a certain thing, a certain kind of object out of computer enhancement of a photo, would it be possible to fake that?
In some cases, it probably could be. I would qualify it in the following way. If, for example, I wanted to distort an object to appear to look like some other object, I could do that if the object that I wished to start the distortion operation on had certain characteristics which were probably similar to the object that I wished to arrive at when I did this distortion, whatever it might be. But it
Could
would
you,
be,
for example, if you set out to do it, take that what has been alleged to be a head in the bush, and with the right adjustment of light and computer assistance, make that into a person?
how would you judge the criterion of making it into a person? I guess would be
Enough so that you could convince the average layman that that was, in fact, a person in the bush.
Yes, I believe that could be done. What you would probably go about doing would be to add more color to it so that more skin tones would be visible, perhaps using the machine in some artistic way, put in more of a hairline that is immediately visible in the raw imagery, so on.
Dr. Hunt, let's turn to the analysis of the Hughes film that you talked about this morning,
Okay.
which shows the Texas School Book Depository building. Did the photo panel look for motion in other areas of the picture than this sixth floor open window, the
Yes,
southeast window?
we looked in there. There's an adjacent set of windows also on the sixth floor where it's been alleged that either motion occurs or there's a visibility of something like a human form in that region. That area was also analyzed at the same time we analyzed the open window.
And what were the results?
The conclusions were negative. We found nothing that we would attribute to real motion of any object that was recognizable by the panel.
Referring to the auto-radiographic enhancement of the Dillard photo, which is JFK 156, I don't know that we have to have it back up there, but I wanted to clarify something you said this morning that left me a little uncertain as to what you meant. You said that you were unable to detect any human presence in the window. Now, as a point of clarification, you were referring, were you not, to the photographic image of the window. You would have no way of saying whether there was an individual further inside the window than that.
That is correct. Our conclusions related strictly to that negative image which we had on hand. Within that negative, we could see no human form or shape.
The conclusion, therefore, is then that if Oswald shot the president from that window, that at the time that photograph was taken, the shot that you were working with, at the time that was taken, he had sufficiently removed himself from the window inside that all the photo enhancement could not bring him out to light in that. Is that correct?
That would be my supposition, that in fact, if he is there, he is beyond the line of sight, not just in the shadows, but outside of the line of sight, visible through the window.
I would like to ask the staff to put up JFK 153, if it's... As I understand it, Dr. Hunt, this is a picture that was taken a few seconds after the shot. Is that correct?
I'm not sure until I see the picture. Which
Okay,
one you
fine.
referred to?
I believe that's the one of the TSB.
Yes, right. Yes, in answer to your question, that was taken a few seconds after the last shot was fired. Or at least that's Dillard's testimony to the Warren Commission, I believe.
Now, directing your attention to that particular exhibit, the photograph in the area of the sixth floor window, the open window, there seems to be a change in the configuration of the boxes. How did the photo panel account for this?
A change in configuration of the boxes with respect to what? With respect to another window view?
No, with respect to other photos that you analyzed.
Okay, probably the one most pertinent to that would be the exhibit which is showing next to it at the moment. I'm not aware of the exhibit number for it. But that shows the same window taken approximately 1 to 2 minutes after the first picture which we talked about. the one taken by Dillard on the right, the one by Powell on the left. You're correct in perceiving that there is something which we could ascribe to a change in the configuration of the boxes. For example, the picture on the right, we see only two boxes, one at the left of the windowsill and just a corner of the one peeping up at the right of the windowsill.
Right.
Whereas in the picture, the enlarged picture, for example, on the left, we see not just the two boxes. You can still see, for example, on the left, there is the same small box at the left. There's the same corner peeping up at the right. But now we have two or three other boxes apparently rising up in between them. There's two possible explanations, I guess, for that the panel considered. One is that we are seeing boxes which are in the room, but because of our perspective, our line of sight is different. We're seeing different boxes than were visible in the other picture. The second explanation is that there has been physically a movement of the boxes in the room during the time which elapsed between the taking of those pictures.
All right, now, there's no way that we can know which it is?
There are ways of eliminating or narrowing down the possibilities between those two choices. For example, given the geometry at which you're viewing and given the apparent sunlight on the boxes, you could try to guess how far into the room those boxes do lie. For example, if you look at the two boxes which appear to have been introduced in the picture on the left, they appear to be in full sunlight, which means they must not lie too far inside the room because this was high noon. In November, the sun angle is simply not that low in Dallas at high noon in November to shine sunlight very deep into the room. So they can certainly not be too far behind the plane of the window. And that would therefore tend to rule out the possibility that we're looking at a box which lies in one position in the room and is simply tended to be viewed in different perspective from two different viewing points.
You say it rules that out?
It tends to rule it out, yes. It does not rule it out completely because we lack what is usually referred to as the analytical information from the position of the two photographers to precisely plot the positions of those boxes by stereo analysis techniques.
Well, if it generally tends to rule that out, then it seems that this committee would be left with only one conclusion, and that is that a box was actually moved.
That would be my own personal conclusion, that somebody or something moved boxes around in that room during the time of taking of those two pictures.
I'd like to move to the next film. Perhaps we don't have to have it up there. I think we remember pretty clearly what that is. But in aerospace's enhancement of the dark image, in what would then have been your enhancement photo, which I believe showed above that, the image seen at the retaining wall, these bright spots in the area of that image, which were made even more significant in the upper portion of it.
Right, that's the...
Now, I didn't quite get how you accounted for those.
Our explanation would be that we're seeing some shadow shining through there's a large stand of trees, which you do not immediately see in that frame, of course, lying to the left of the frame. And there is a wall or structural wall back behind this whole region. And at various places, the sunlight is shining through the trees, and you're seeing little bits of light speckling on the pattern of the wall behind it. Another explanation would be just that there's simply three bright splotches of paint on the wall back there, for example, which are visible even in the deep shadow that they lie in.
Now, while we're referring to this particular section of the photos, there's been a great deal made of this business of somebody seeing a puff of smoke or something they thought was a puff of smoke in the area. As I remember your testimony this morning, you said there is no photographic evidence of that.
That's correct.
Is there anything that you could tell me that would clarify whether or not your techniques would tend to increase the prospect of seeing it if it were there, or is there something in your computer enhancement that would actually tend to filter, for lack of a better term, would tend to filter that smoke out of the picture when you go to blowing it up and putting it on a computer?
The techniques which we applied in the analysis were specifically those which we hoped would enhance details or features of that type. In other words, we were careful to guard against using any kind of technique which would have the prospect of, and your term of filtering it out is a technically proper one, which would we avoided techniques which would filter out any such type of artifacts. We were using techniques which would bring those details out.
So you set out actually to increase the prospect of seeing any smoke that would appear in the picture?
Well, not just smoke. It's not to say we were concentrating on just smoke, but we used techniques which would bring out details of any kind, whether they be smoke or people standing at walls, whatever. Those techniques tend to be fairly universal in their application for the enhancement or restoration of details.
Let me ask the clerk to put up JFK 155. This is the Willis slide. I don't think that's up there now. Now, obviously, the human eye doesn't give us the full story. We've discovered that, if we've discovered anything in the last two to 3 weeks. My viewing of this picture indicates that that's a pretty good quality photograph, given a lot of the other things that we've been trying to work with and that you've been trying to work with. And therefore, my layman's judgment is that it is that good a photograph. Why couldn't you get more information from it in regard to the dark image on the retaining wall?
Well, the answer is that your layman's judgment is just, first of all, from the distance that you're viewing it, is not accurate. The human eye has an inability to resolve details, and that inability, of course, is governed by how close you are to an image. You have to, first of all, look at the image close up in the region to the areas or the features that you're trying to deal with. And then secondly, if you do that under the magnification, and by magnification I mean the small sampling of individual numbers, such as I described in my earlier testimony, if you do that under magnification, which is consistent with the details you're trying to resolve, you find indeed that the blur, or the extent to which some of those features are blurred, are almost the magnitude of things that you're trying to resolve. In other words, if I were to put a measure of 1 inch on the film of some object I were looking at, I would find that it had been blurred by almost a distance of my hypothetical 1 inch. So that from your viewing point, it's difficult to conclude whether that is a good or bad image. It's the kind of thing that you can really conclude, or a photo analyst can conclude, only by looking at it under the proper magnification.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't this a blow-up of a 35 millimeter slide?
It is I think it's roughly about a full frame print. By that I mean I don't think it's much of a blow-up. It tends to show most of the original frame of the original slide.
And is this the slide that you had difficulty with because of the coating on it?
Yes, when it was received by the contractors who were performing the work for the committee to be scanned and digitized, it was noticed at that time that there was some kind of grayish coating on it.
Somewhat?
Some kind of grayish coating. A grayish coating.
Was this in the processing of the film, or?
We're not aware of the source of that coating. We don't know how it got on there.
Dr. Hunt, did the photo panel make use of any information that came from prior studies done on the photographic materials, because there's been a great many?
We made use of three different studies which were performed by iTech Corporation in the years 1967, which were performed for Life magazine at that time, and then another study performed in 1976 for CBS television.
And did you, I'm now talking about your technique, did you take what they had developed as basic knowledge and go from that? That is, did you rely upon that data, or how did you?
We tended to operate in an independent mode of the iTech studies. There's two reasons for that. First of all, technology has advanced considerably from the time of the 1967 studies. More is known about those processes now than was known then. And the second reason was that we were not entirely in agreement with a couple of the techniques that ITEC used, or we thought it was possible to improve upon them in one or two ways. Which is not to say that we faulted the ITEC study. It's just simply there were other options that could be explored, and we thought it was worthwhile to do so.
So are you satisfied then that you and your group explored all the options that were open to you given the data and the material you had to work with and the state of the art now?
That's correct. We think the sum total of the things that we did, the things that ITEC did, represents a very broad spectrum of the options that would be available to any person taking up this technology and applying it to that type of information.
Are there any cautionary notes that you would give either ourselves or somebody reading this report 5 or 10 years down the way? Any cautions to be observed in the efforts to enhance poor quality photographs?
Yes, I guess the cautions that I would give would be probably the cautions that everybody who intimately works with this technology already knows. Namely, that in anything you do in the way of enhancing an image, it's important to interpret the results which you achieve and interpret it strictly in terms of what you see on the film. My favorite cliche in this regard, and people who worked with me on the panel have heard me use it before, is that low-quality imagery is very much like a Rorschach ink blot. People will look at it and see a lot of different things under a lot of different circumstances. And my main caution in that regard would make sure that you don't fall in the traps that can be presented by drawing more conclusions than are necessarily warranted by the hard evidence on the film itself.
I've sometimes looked at some of these pictures and the quality of them, and until somebody pointed out that this was a bush and a tree and a gun and whatever, I had not seen that, and I sort of concluded that it's kind of like the ink blot test. You pass out this to 10 people, and the person tends to bring out of that very subjective photo or conglomeration what he takes to it. I don't know whether I'm making myself clear or not, but it's...
Vision is, I have the same impression. Vision is the most subjective of the 5 human senses because it conveys the most information. And consequently, that subjectivity will always be employed to whatever extent an individual allows it to be employed.
Now, with regard to that one particular one, which has been, sensational, that is the seeing of the form in the bush and the rifle, presumably, and there's a tremendous argument back and forth as to what people are seeing when they look at that. As I understood your testimony this morning, you did a pretty tough analysis of it, but I didn't hear anything that satisfied me. I don't mean any severe criticism here, but I didn't hear anything that satisfied me as to how you dispensed with the idea that that long, black, thin, 45-degree object was not a rifle. Can you tell me what kind of tests you did or didn't do on that particular question?
Yes, perhaps it would be better if I went to the display itself.
Would you? And let's see, you need to... Does he have everything he needs up there?
To go to your question, besides the placement of the figure out in the plaza and the conclusion that if this is a rifle in the figure's hands, that it's geometrically impossible for it to be lying in front of the bushes, therefore ruling it out in that grounds, we also did some very precise measurements on what I referred to earlier as the rifle stock, namely this thick linear portion running at 45 degrees, which I'm pointing to here. And the measurements were analytical in nature. As to say, since this is a color picture, we can measure red, green, and blue out of this color picture. Those red, green, and blue measurements were then processed by a technique which was originally developed by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration for the isolation of geographic and vegetation features on ground from satellites looking at the Earth. That technique is one of taking the individual colors which you measure, the red, green, and the blue, looking at the numbers measured by them, and then dividing them one into the other, and then making a picture out of the results of that. When we did that, we found out the following, that the ratios of these colors, in other words, the relative balance of one color to another, which we see in the region of what I've referred to as the stock of the rifle, that those measurements for those bands were consistent with the same measurements taken back here in the limousine, which you see in the hole in the bushes as it's passing through. Our conclusions were that all you're seeing in this region of the so-called rifle stock is nothing but a chance hole in the bushes, and you're literally looking at the hole in the bushes to the background of the limousine, and the color measurements bear that out. A second thing we did was to just simply look at the bush in the enhanced version. In the enhanced version of the bush, since we have tended to de-blur the image, you'll notice a lot of features running at 45 degrees, the same feature angle as we see for this thing purported to be a rifle barrel. It is the conclusion of the panel that all we're looking at in that case are just branches or twigs of the bush, and that what we're seeing is nothing more than a common growth pattern of this bush itself. If each one of these is a rifle, then you can count at least 7 or 8 rifles down here, which we consider to be an absurdity.
So now, I'm not sure I understood everything you said, but what you are saying is that the paint or the coloration of that alleged form that was the rifle matches precisely that of the side of the limousine?
That's correct. So,
and it's your conclusion then what? That we're looking at a little piece of the limousine through a bush?
That's correct. There just happens to be a hole in the bushes at this point of a strange shape. And it was sort of a rectangular 45-degree shape, which has the same color reflectance values as the back side of the limousine as it proceeds across the plaza.
Thank you. I just have one concluding question, and if you want to return to your material. I take it that all of your findings and the analysis and the methods in which you arrived there will be a part of a report to this committee?
That is correct.
Now, would it be possible, once that is all in, for someone who is interested in this particular phase of it to duplicate the study that you made, and would they come out with the same answer, or is there enough subjectivity that it's kind of what you bring to it is what you take from it?
To answer your first question, yes, it would be entirely possible for someone to duplicate that effort that has been carried out for the Select Committee. The reason it would be possible to duplicate it is that all the data which was used in the computer analysis is going to be recorded on magnetic tape and made available to the National Archives as a permanent record for the future. And furthermore, the report which will be written will be describing the actual details of the processing which was carried out, so that if someone wished to take up that issue and use the same techniques, they could do it. So in answer to your first question, that would be my reply. The second question, would they come to the same conclusions? I believe they would.
Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. McKinney.
Mr. Chairman, I have no questions. I just want to thank Dr. I think that you've been one of the most lucid and clear witnesses we've had, and we've had a great many fantastic expert witnesses. And I just have to say, as a member of this committee who have sort of twisted my hands over a lot of the questions you've answered today, I want to thank you for the way you've answered them and the thoroughness in which you've answered them, and your openness and your comments. You have neither been prejudiced nor opinionated, and to me, your scientific research is amongst the best I've ever listened to as a congressman in this Congress.
Thank you.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Michigan. Sorry. Anyone seeking further recognition? Okay. Doctor, at the conclusion of a witness's testimony before our committee, he's entitled to a period of 5 minutes, which time he can make any further comment he so desires relative to his testimony. I would extend to you 5 minutes for that purpose at this time if you so desire.
Thank you. I guess the only comments I would have would be to echo those of Sergeant Kirk earlier and Dr. Snow earlier, thanking the committee for its interest, its support, and its enthusiasm as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure all of our committee would concur in the remarks made by the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. McKinney, regarding your excellent presentation here. Thank you. Chair recognizes Professor Blakey.
When the Zapruder film of the Kennedy assassination was made public, critics and people generally were fascinated by the sight of a man with a black umbrella standing just a few feet from the presidential limousine. It was a sunshiny day, so what was the purpose of anyone to have an umbrella in Dealey Plaza? Theories about the umbrella man, for the most part, attributed to him some sinister intent. At the very least, he was a signalman for the actual gunman, though one critic proposed the idea that a firing device concealed in the umbrella was the weapon used to assassinate the president. It also appeared curious that the umbrella man was one of the few spectators in Dealey Plaza who was not later identified. In fact, his identity has remained a secret to this day. When it studied all of the photographs taken in Dealey Plaza on November the 22nd, 1963, the committee discovered one taken by a life photographer in which the umbrella man can be seen from the front. It is moments after the president has been shot, and the man is sitting on a curb, his umbrella this time lying at his feet. The only problem was that he was off to the corner of the picture, and the image is tiny, unrecognizable in fact. Nevertheless, through photographic enhancement techniques, the committee was able to obtain a blow-up of the photo in which the umbrella man appeared clearly enough to be identified. The committee released the picture to the press, asking anyone who recognized the umbrella man to contact the committee. The committee was indeed contacted, and as a result, the umbrella man was located by the committee. It would be appropriate at this time, Mr. Chairman, to call Louie Steven Witt.
Committee calls Mr. Witt. Sir, you please stand, raise your right hand, be sworn. Solemnly swear testimony you will give before this committee is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated. Chair recognizes counsel for the committee, Mr. Ginsman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Witt, would you state your full name for the record?
Louie Steven Witt.
Mr. Witt, I would like to direct your attention to November 22nd, 1963. Were you in Dealey Plaza in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963?
Yes, I was.
Did you witness the assassination of President Kennedy?
Yes.
Have you previously testified about the assassination of President Kennedy?
No.
Have you ever given information to any law enforcement bodies concerning the assassination?
No.
Mr. Witt, what did you do on the morning of November 22nd, 1963?
I guess I went to work in the usual manner, about 8 or 8:30. Had a normal work morning.
And where did you work at that time?
For the Rio Grande Insurance Company.
Mr. Witt, could you hold the microphone closer to you?
Yes.
I believe we're having trouble hearing you. Thank you. What did you do at lunchtime on that day?
Well, I went out, as I usually did every day when the weather was decent, for a walk.
Were you carrying anything?
Yes, on this particular day I was carrying a black umbrella.
Mr. Chairman, at this time I would ask that the exhibit marked as JFK 405 be entered into the record. Would Mr. Witt, can you identify Exhibit 405?
I would say that's the umbrella I was carrying.
Why were you carrying an umbrella that day?
Actually, I was going to use this umbrella to heckle the president's motorcade.
How had you gotten this idea?
In coffee break conversation, someone had mentioned that the umbrella thing was a sore spot with the Kennedy family. Being a conservative type fellow, I sort of placed them in the liberal camp, and I was just going to kind of do a little heckling.
Are you saying that you were going to use the umbrella as a symbol for the purpose of heckling?
I think that would cover it.
On November 22nd, 1963, were you aware of the motorcade route?
No, not really. I knew that they would be going down the center part of town somewhere in the noontime.
What route did you follow during your walk?
Well, when I left the building, which was located at the corner of Elm Street and Field Street, I went south on Field Street over to Main Street. This was where the crowds of people were, where the people were lining the sidewalks on either side.
When you reached Main Street, in which direction did you head?
I traveled west. This would put me turning right from the direction that I came.
West on Main Street?
Yes.
Why did you continue in that direction?
Well, every day I walk someplace, and looking back, the only reason I can account for my going that direction as opposed to the other direction would be that since I was carrying that stupid umbrella and intent on heckling the president, and not being a person who was given to, prior to this time, doing things that would bring myself into notice, the only thing I can say is that I had went down the street where I assumed there would be fewer people because the buildings on the west end of the street, or the lower end of the street as I might refer to it, there were either no buildings or there were low buildings where there were not a lot of people working.
How far did you go on?
Would you be kind enough to pull that microphone closer to you? We're having some difficulty hearing you. Right.
Is that too close, or is that about right?
No, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you.
How far did you go on Main Street?
Well, I walked all the way down Main Street to the courthouse records building area and on to Houston Street.
Which way did you travel on Houston?
Well, at this time, I think I must have been planning to go back to the street that I worked on, Elm Street, which would be one block over. I traveled north over toward Elm Street.
What did you do once you arrived at Elm Street?
Well, I ended up turning left and going down into what's known as Dealey Plaza. The only reason I can think that I ended up down there was possibly I looked down there and saw an area where there were not a large group of people. There were people in that area, but there was also in this area, which later became known as the Grassy Knoll, there was no one out in that area in any great numbers.
What did you do when you reached the Grassy Knoll?
I think I went sort of, maybe halfway up the grassy area, somewhere in that vicinity. I'm pretty sure I sat down.
Were you waiting for the motorcade?
Yes.
Do you recall how long you waited?
I really couldn't say. I don't think I was there very long, since I was not that all-fired determined to carry out what I set out to do. I'm sure that I didn't wait a great length of time.
Did the motorcade come soon thereafter?
Yes, it apparently did.
What did you do when you saw the motorcade coming into the area?
Well, as I recall, the motorcade had already made the turn and was coming down Elm Street, going west on Elm, before I became aware that it was there. And it would have been, from a straight line position, it would have been off to my left about like this when I saw it.
What did you do when you saw it approaching you?
I think I got up and started fiddling with that umbrella, trying to get it open, and at the same time I was walking forward, walking towards the street.
And you have testified that you were opening the umbrella to use it as a symbol, hoping to catch the president's eye?
Yes, sir.
Could you elaborate further as to the type of symbol you thought you were applying?
Well, I just knew that it was a sore spot for the Kennedys, that I just knew the vague generalities of it. It had something to do with something that happened years ago with the senior Kennedy, Joe Kennedy, when he was ambassador to England.
What happened next?
Beg your pardon?
What happened next? I believe you testified that you were moving forward, opening your umbrella as the motorcade was approaching you.
Yes.
Limousine.
As I moved towards the street, still walking on the grass, I heard the shots that I eventually learned were shots. At the time, somehow it didn't register on me as shots because they were so close together, and so many of it, it was like hearing a string of firecrackers, something like this. It didn't, at that moment, it did not register on me as being that.
Did you react in any way?
No, I continued to move forward and finally got this umbrella up in the air. I think by the time I got the thing up in the air, I was over and possibly standing on the retaining wall.
Did President Kennedy see your umbrella?
I have no way of knowing. I wouldn't know.
What do you next recall happening?
Let me go back a minute. As I was moving forward, I apparently had this umbrella in front of me for some few steps, whereas other people saw, as I understand, saw the president shot and his movement such as that. I did not see this because of this thing in front of me. The next thing I saw, after I saw the car coming down the street, down the hill to my left, the next thing I saw, the car was just about at a position like this, at this angle here. And at this time, there was the car stopping, the screeching of tires, the jamming on of brakes, motorcycle patrolman right there beside one of the cars. One car ran up on the president's car, and a man jumped off and jumped on the back. These were the scenes that unfolded as I reached a point to where I was seeing things.
What did you hear at that time? Did you hear any voices?
I don't recall any voices at that particular time. After I finally became aware that something had happened, something terrible had happened, I just sat down. I was standing on the retaining wall, and I just sat down, just right straight down. And apparently I don't know if I laid the umbrella down or dropped it or what I did. Nevertheless, I think it ended up on the sidewalk, and I just sat there. Some of the things that I recall, there was one of the things that I remember seeing while standing, there was a couple I looked down to the right, and there was a man and a woman, and they were covering some children. They were lying down, and they were covering these children with their body. And this may have caused me to sit down, or I may have just sat down because I was stunned, because there for a few minutes or for a few seconds at least, I didn't seem to be able to collect my thoughts. Sometime later, after the cars moved out, when all this activity of the cars stopping and the cars moved out, I recall a man sitting down to my right, and he said something like, "They done shot them folks. They done shot." He repeated it 2 or 3 times, but there was repetition, him saying the same thing.
What was he saying?
He was saying, "They done shot them folks," something to this effect.
Can you describe this man?
I remember him as being a Negro man. I don't know if I ever actually looked at him for any length of time or not.
Did you hear any other voices?
Well, there was sort of a pandemonium all around. The other thing that stands out in my mind is there was a woman or a girl, a female voice up behind me, shrieking and crying, and she again repeated the same thing several times. She said something to the effect, "They shot those people right before my eyes," or something like this. Anyway, there was repetition in what she said. She said it 2 or 3 times.
Mr. Witt, at this time, please refer to Exhibits 130 and 404. Exhibit 130, which is already on the easel, was previously entered into the record. Mr. Chairman, I would ask at this time that Exhibit 404 be entered into the record.
Without objection, it may be entered into the record at this point.
Mr. Witt, can you identify the photographs on Exhibit 130 on the left?
Can I identify him in what?
Can you identify for instance, the 2 pictures of the man in the top 2 photographs of that exhibit?
Well,
with the arrows pointed?
Yes, that seems to be me.
In the bottom left corner, there is an item in red. Can you identify that?
That would be this umbrella.
And in the bottom right corner, can you identify the person sitting?
I'm sure that's me. I'd have to say that's me.
In the other exhibit, which is 404, can you identify either of those men sitting?
Yes, the one on the right is definitely me.
Is the one on the left the man whom you were talking about earlier?
I really don't know. It could be, or it might not be. I really don't know. I don't recall ever actually looking at this person. I don't know if I ever replied to what he said. I could have just kind of speaking automatically, maybe agreeing with what he said or something like this.
Did this man have a walkie-talkie or a radio or any device of any sort?
I don't recall the person carrying anything, although I would say this, that they could have been carrying something and it would not have registered on me at this particular time.
Did he act in any peculiar manner?
Not that I recall.
Did you ever see him before or after that day?
No.
What happened next after you were seated and after you had heard these voices?
I continued to sit there for some period of time, and I don't know how long I was there. I don't know if it was say a minute or 2 or 3 minutes or longer. I doubt if I stayed there very long. The only other thing that comes to my mind that I can definitely remember is while sitting there and all of this commotion is going on around me, I just recall looking up to my left, and there was a policeman standing up there with a drawn gun. He was holding the point of the gun up in the air, the barrel of the gun.
How long did you stay in the area?
There again, I really don't know as to the number of minutes. I'm sure that I did not stay there very, very long.
When you left, did you go back to work?
Yes.
When did you find out that the president had in fact been assassinated?
When I went back into the building, into the department where I worked, someone in there had a transistor radio, and the first thing that was said when I walked in is they said, "Did you hear about the president being shot?" And I said something to the effect of, I was down there in all of that.
Mr. Witt, some assassination critics have alleged that your actions with your umbrella were a signal to an assassin or to assassins to fire, or a signal that the president had in fact been hit. Were you signaling to anyone besides the president?
No, no one.
Mr. Chairman, at this time I would ask that the exhibit marked as JFK 404 be entered into the record.
Without objection, may be entered to the record.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to correct that to exhibit 406.
May be so corrected.
Mr. Witt, exhibit 406 is a copyrighted diagram drawn by assassination critic Robert B. Cutler, which shows two umbrellas with rocket and flechette attachments. Mr. Witt, do you know what a flechette is?
I do now. I did not prior to our interview yesterday evening.
Thank you. Did the umbrella in your possession on November 22nd, 1963 contain a flechette or a rocket or a dart?
No, it did not.
Has exhibit 405, the umbrella, ever contained a flechette, rocket, or dart?
No, not since it's been in my possession.
Did the umbrella in your possession on November 22nd, 1963 contain a gun or a weapon of any sort?
No.
Has exhibit 405 ever contained a gun or weapon of any sort?
This umbrella?
Yes.
No, no.
Thank you very much, Mr. Witt. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from District of Columbia, Mr. Fauntroy, for such time as he may consume.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Witt, first of all, I wonder if you would tell us where you lived on November the 22nd, 1963. Where were you living?
My home address?
Home address.
At 7209 Embassy Street. I still live there.
I see. And where did you work at that time?
I was working for the Rio Grande National Life Insurance Company. They were located at 251 North Field Street.
At Elm and Beale?
At the corner of Elm and Field, yes, sir.
Do you still work there?
No, sir. That company merged with a company in Kentucky in 1968, and that's when I left the insurance company.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall what kind of day it was on the 22nd in terms of its the weather in the morning when you got up at home?
I don't recall the early part of the day. I only know what the weather was around the noontime area.
I see. Did you keep your umbrella at home, or did you keep your umbrella at work?
I don't. The umbrella could have been either place. I tried to keep an umbrella in the car, or it would either be at work. Unfortunately, it always seemed that if I was in the car in the parking lot and it was raining, the umbrella was at work, and I never seemed to have it at the right time. That morning, I don't know if I took it from the car to work or if it was already at my place of employment.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you left, so you don't know whether you took the umbrella from home to work and thence to the motorcade, or whether the umbrella was at work. You don't recall that?
I don't recall, no, sir.
All right. Now, when you left, let's assume that it was at work. When you left the office for lunch, is it your testimony that it was your intent to utilize the umbrella to heckle the president?
Yes, that's true. That was the only reason I was carrying it.
So that you weren't just going for a walk at lunch?
Well, I did go out for a walk every day.
I see.
That every day that the weather was not extreme, either raining or excessively hot. I took the umbrella along, going out if it was handy for me to do my little act of heckling. Then that was my plan. Yes.
So it was your intent to use the umbrella if you happened to be on the route that the president was traveling during that day.
That's correct.
But you did not know exactly what that route was.
I knew in general because all of the parades and this type of thing usually went down Main Street.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if you'd care to tell us a little more about your understanding of the significance of the umbrella and why you felt that it would heckle the president to raise the umbrella.
I knew the generalities of the thing. It had something to do with when the senior Mr. Kennedy was ambassador to England and the prime minister, some activity they had in appeasing Hitler. The umbrella that the Prime Minister of England came back with got to be a symbol with some manner with the British people. By association, it got transferred to the Kennedy family, and as I understood, it was a sore spot with the Kennedy family. And like I said, in coffee break conversations, someone had mentioned that I think it's one of the towns in Arizona, either Tucson or Phoenix, that someone had been out at the airport or at some place where some members of the Kennedy family came through, and they were rather irritated by the fact that they were brandishing the umbrellas. This is how the idea sort of got stuck in my mind.
Is it true that what you felt was that Mr. Kennedy would be sensitive because of the appeasement image of the umbrella as related to his father?
Not the appeasement thing. It was just, excuse me, I just understood that it was sort of a sore spot with them. And this was just one thing. I personally never thought too much of liberal politics in general. In this case, the Kennedy family just happened to be in office.
I see. And it had no relationship in your own thinking between Mr. Kennedy's posture with, say, the Russians?
No, that wasn't it at all.
But someone you had read in the paper that someone had used an umbrella to heckle the president, and your way into Dealey Plaza because there were not many people there, and you thought you would have an opportunity to, in fact, see the president and perhaps even heckle him. Now, do you recall seeing the motorcade approach Dealey Plaza?
Yes.
Now-
As a matter of fact, it was traveling west at the time I saw it.
All right. Now, where were you at that time?
I was sitting somewhere in the grass area there in Dealey Plaza.
All right. Will we suspend for just a moment?
He's telling me that he's very camera shy, right? Pressed it up enough to have him demonstrate. What were your commitments to it? 20 miles an hour. I said I couldn't demonstrate. I said he couldn't know exactly what he was doing. Run on over. He says he can't. I won't have him do it. I'm asking to describe it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the brief interlude here. Mr. Witt, I was, as we suspended momentarily, I was asking you to recall the turning of the motorcade and the car in which President Kennedy sat into Dealey Plaza. Can you recall that?
Yes, sir.
And you, at that time, you were telling me were sitting down, probably on the grassy knoll.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Now, describe to us what happened and what you did when the car turned into the Dealey Plaza.
Well, after I became aware of his presence, I got up and took the umbrella and started walking towards the street and opening the umbrella at the same time.
So that is, to the best of your recollection, you, as you approached the sidewalk, you were opening the umbrella.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
All right, and the car is now passing, and you describe to us what happened.
Well, as I was moving forward, opening this umbrella, it was somewhere at, excuse me, it was somewhere at this point that I heard the shots. And I continued to move forward, and eventually brought the umbrella up over my head. I think by this time I was, had already, by the time I got the umbrella up over my head, I was at the retaining wall and standing on it.
All right. Now, the car is moving beyond you now. Are you aware that that the president has been hit at the point that after you hear these firecracker-like shots?
No, sir. My view of the car during that length of time was blocked by the umbrella being open, and the next time I saw the car, after I saw it coming down on my left, traveling west, the next time I saw the car was when this activity of the car stopping, the one car rushing up on another, the motorcycle patrolman stopping, there was this screeching of tires, this sort of thing. One thing I recall, there was a movement in the president's car, but this time I don't recall seeing the president. He must have, I'm sure he was down. The only thing I recall was there was a sort of a pink movement, and that was Jackie Kennedy, I think, wearing a pink dress or something. This pink thing stood out in my mind, and all of this happened in very rapid order. As soon as the one car ran up behind this one, a man jumped off, and I think the first car was pulling out about the time he jumped on the back.
And your testimony is that you then sat down where you were pictured there.
Yes, sir.
In the exhibit. And
at this point, I was aware that something terrible had happened.
Something terrible had happened?
Yes. At the time that I was moving forward with this umbrella in front of me, I was not aware of what was happening, even though I had heard the shots, until the movement, all this activity with the cars. That was my first awareness, and it was at this point that I just sat down.
Mm-hmm. And as you sat, you recall that two things. One, that you recall seeing a couple covering their children, you say off to the side?
Yes, off to my right.
And you recall the presence of someone sitting beside you. Is that true?
That's correct.
And someone from behind you saying something?
Yes. I don't know which of these came first, but the person sitting to my right said something to the effect that they done shot them folks, something like this. I think it was repeated about 2 or 3 times. There was repetition. I don't know if they meant to be talking to me or if they were just talking out loud to themselves. As I testified before, I don't think I ever actually looked directly at this person. I don't recall ever, say, just turning and taking a good look at the person. I think what I was doing, I was just, at this point, I was somewhat stunned, and I just heard this while sitting there. At about this same time, I don't know if it was before I heard this or after, about this same time, there was this female voice up behind me shrieking and saying, "They've shot those people. They shot those people." I think she may have said, "They shot those people before my eyes," or something like this. There were a number of people I could hear crying in the background, this sort of thing.
So that your description of your emotions after sitting down would be that you were stunned. Is that true?
Yes. Once the realization that something
terrible
had happened. Yes, I was stunned.
I must admit that my reaction to the picture by which you were ultimately identified was one of a very cool cat. That is, you look rather cool there to me. But you would describe...
I can assure you I was not that all cool. I think one of my reactions was knowing that I was there with this stupid umbrella and heckling the president, and of course I didn't know that the president had been killed. As a matter of fact, I didn't know he had been shot. I just knew that something had happened by the activity and what seemed to be in the air around me. But I think my own thinking may have been at the time that I'd have to describe it as a kind of like a bad joke that had gone sour, or a practical joke you'd pulled on someone that had gone sour, since I was there with this thing and for that purpose.
Mr. Witt, is it your testimony that at no time did the Dallas police or the FBI contact you about your presence at Dealey Plaza at this time?
No. In later years, after all this came up, I have always wondered why they didn't, but no one ever, so far as I know, no one ever made any attempt to find out who I was or why I was there.
When did you find out that you were a subject of suspicion? That is, that the umbrella man was somehow involved in the assassination?
When the committee sent these things to the newspapers, and it was printed in the local papers, in the Dallas paper there. As a matter of fact, I didn't see it on the day that it came out. We take the afternoon paper, the evening paper. I didn't see it on the day that it came out. I saw it later after I had taken the newspapers to work because I wrapped small parts in it for shipping. And it was this point that I saw the thing and read the thing, and was then aware that someone was looking for me, so to speak.
So that, is it your testimony that you did not learn that somebody was concerned about the umbrella man until 10, 15 years after? To 1978, only in 78 were you aware?
As far as I know, no one was concerned with me.
So that explains, therefore, why you did not yourself contact the FBI or the Dallas Police Department, because you were not aware that someone with an umbrella in Dealey Plaza was an object of interest.
No, as a matter of fact, I wasn't aware that I was an object of interest. As a matter of fact, I have found out since in the last few weeks that there have been countless number of books and all sorts of controversy over this thing. But I've drifted along all of these years, and I've never seen one of these books because I've never been a fan of this assassination thing. I don't go out of my way to read anything about it. So it's sort of all gone over my head up until the last few weeks.
Now, is it your testimony that you did, in fact, see this picture in the papers in July of this year?
I saw this picture right here, the blurred picture in the lower right-hand corner of that.
And did you recognize it as yourself?
After I read the account, yes.
Why didn't you come forward then?
Quite frankly, I didn't, at this point, I certainly didn't want anybody to know who I was.
Mm-hmm.
I would say further that had you never found me, I would have been far happier than I am right at this moment.
Mr. Chairman, I'll suspend at this time in the event there are other members who have questions for the witness.
Mr.
Just a little time.
All right. Chair will protect the gentleman's time. Mr. Witt, the umbrella which lies before you on the witness table, did you bring it here today?
I brought it from Dallas, and I turned it over to Mr. Gensman yesterday.
And has that umbrella been in your possession from November 22nd, 1963 until today?
Yes, it has.
Has never left your possession for any reason?
Well, I would have to...
Other than here when you gave it to Mr. Gensman?
No, as a matter of fact, the day that I went back to work, this umbrella was just tossed back on the rack, where the raincoats and other umbrellas would have been.
Sure.
It could have been used by any number of people. There were quite a number of people who worked in this department. Young boys who went out on errands, they could have taken this umbrella any number of times in or out.
Okay. Now, I know that when Congressman Fauntroy was questioning you, it had been his intent to ask you to demonstrate the way in which you had held the umbrella on that specific date. But he was informed by counsel for the committee you had made a specific request that you not be asked to make such a demonstration. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And is that still your request to this committee?
Yes, sir. My line of thinking is that since we're not in the same area, we couldn't exactly duplicate what I did there. The only thing, my doing that, it would just be more fodder for an over-eager press back in Dallas to show this off and continue to embarrass me and my family more so than we have already been embarrassed.
Certainly.
I would add at this point that we've been through quite a bit.
Okay.
I brought it on myself, but nevertheless, we've been through quite a bit already.
Well, I certainly understand that, and I'm sure this committee is going to respect your wishes in that respect. I have one concern, though, and that is that if the committee does not cause the umbrella to be opened up, it may lend, once again, more speculation that the reason we didn't open it was because there was such a dart gun in it. For that reason, I'm not going to ask you to do it, but I think that it's important that committee staff open this umbrella so we can ascertain there's no dart gun in it.
As far as I'm concerned, they're certainly welcome to.
All right. Can we have someone from the staff do that? That Miss Cynthia Cooper of the committee staff. Maybe you ought to turn that way with it.
That's what it always did when I took it out in the rain.
Cindy. Hold it up. Be very careful.
Well, I guess there's no gun in it. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Devine.
Mr. Witt, we understand your reluctance to be here, and we appreciate very much your coming forward. Just for the record, would you tell the committee what you did when you saw your picture in the paper? To whom did you report, or what did you do?
When I saw the picture?
Yes.
I didn't do anything at that time. I was working at the time I saw it and was aware that I was wanted by this, for questioning by this committee. Yes. I didn't do anything. I didn't make any effort to contact this committee or anyone else. I just did nothing.
Well, how did you become revealed publicly as the person with the umbrella?
As I understand it, one of my good friends
In quotes.
went to the press. As a matter of fact, a couple of guys came into where I work and started barraging me with questions, and then I knew that it was just a matter of time until, they would have my name in the paper, and then it would be known. And so for me, it was just a matter of waiting until somebody came along and said, I want to talk to you.
Fine. Well, now, Mr. Witt, getting back to the time and the place, I think in your original testimony in response to a question from counsel was that you heard a shot or something when you were standing there by the grassy knoll. Could you tell where this disturbance or this shot came from in relation to where you were standing?
No, sir, I really couldn't. Of course, now there were a number of shots, and they all seemed to be just rapid, just very close space. And as to the direction, I couldn't say.
You do not know, or you cannot recall from what direction they may have come. Is that?
No, sir, I'm sorry, I can't be of any help there.
Could you tell this committee, and we recognize that it's been 15 years nearly, can you tell this committee how many shots you thought you heard?
I really couldn't say. Just remembering, I'd have to say 3 or more.
3 or more. Now, were they in rapid succession, or were there intervals?
As I recall, very rapid.
Unless you have some objection, would you demonstrate by rapping your knuckle on the table on about the time interval you feel that you remember the shots were fired?
I don't know if I could really give you a good example, but it was just, it seems to me that they were just one right behind the other, just immediately behind the other.
As I recall, when the President's motorcade was moving towards you, you were standing, and did you run the umbrella up and down as a symbol of Neville Chamberlain, or did you just hold it up, or did you point it in his direction, or what did you do specifically?
I really don't recall. I could have moved the umbrella up and down, but I just don't recall.
But then when the disturbance occurred and the presidential motorcade moved out, you sat down.
Yes, sir.
And there was someone beside you, as is indicated by that lower right-hand picture?
Yes, I still don't know if they were sitting there when I sat down or if they moved to that point later. I don't remember.
Did you say you saw people running then, after you were seated?
No, at one point there was the person that I mentioned before as running was a man who jumped off of the second car and ran and jumped onto the back of the president's car.
I'm talking primarily about spectators. Was there any movement among the spectators that you noticed?
Not that I recall of spectators. There was people who seemed to run from the street up that grassy knoll, but somewhere along the way I heard that these were Secret Service men or maybe plainclothes policemen.
But when you say running up the grassy knoll would mean in a direction away from the president's car?
Away from the street, and it would be to the well, I guess it would be up to the side of that school book depository building.
You mentioned you saw a police officer with a revolver or a handgun in a raised position?
This was some time after some time had elapsed.
Are you talking about seconds or minutes?
More in minutes. This was after I had sat down. As a matter of fact, it was somewhere about the point where I guess I was getting ready to leave.
And after the motorcade moved out and the crowd was mulling around, you just casually went back to your place of employment?
I don't know if casually describes it or not. I did pick up the umbrella and go back up Elm Street to the building where I worked. The one end of the building was on Elm Street.
And that's the first time you learned that the president had been shot?
After I got back into the building, yes, sir.
Fine, that's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to be very brief, but Mr. Witt, in light of what Mr. Fauntleroy and the chairman had mentioned to you earlier, I'd like to know, for the last 15 years, you kept that umbrella at your home or your business place or someplace. Is that correct?
Yes,
You know, and just looking at it, even though I know it flapped over when the young lady opened the umbrella up a minute ago, but to me, the condition of that umbrella is in pretty good shape, wouldn't you say?
I suppose.
Other than this flipping over on the wrong side, you know, you can buy a new one and it will flip over. Why did you keep it 15 years? Did you have any reason for keeping that umbrella that long?
Not particularly. The only reason that I can think that the umbrella survived that long, like I say, and this thing was in use because it was thrown in there with all the others. The only reason I can figure out it's lasted this long is because of the size. You take this thing out and it's big and it's clumsy, whereas I had other umbrellas and would wear a raincoat or something that would take the use off of it.
How many umbrellas? You see, you have others. How many do you have?
I have no idea. Over the years, I would have no idea.
Do you think you could have picked up the wrong one and brought here from Dallas?
It's quite possible. The only reason I believe almost 100% that is the very same umbrella is the fact that it is a big umbrella, and I'm almost positive that's the one.
You said some of the other younger people used the umbrella when you carried it on your job. They might have walked out with it. Could they have walked out with an umbrella and brought this one back, and it had been a different umbrella from the one that you used on the day of John Kennedy being assassinated?
That is entirely possible, but I really don't think that happened.
In your house, there are 2, 3, or 4 umbrellas there in your house. Is that correct?
I wouldn't know how many is there. There's some in the back closet. I usually have one in the car. The other day I stumbled over one in the garage where these things came.
But you did not identify that one 15 years ago, so I'm going to keep this umbrella here.
No. At that particular time, I placed no significance on that umbrella.
Well, when this committee the staff made contact with you, did you go to your closet and say, well, I can identify this particular umbrella, and this is the one that I had on November 22nd of 1963? Were you able to say that to yourself?
Yes. When Mr. Moriarty was at my house there in Dallas, and he asked me if I still had the umbrella. I said, yes, I have an umbrella that I believe is the exact same umbrella.
You didn't have to look at the other umbrellas in your closet?
No, the other umbrellas, I believe, are little stubby things. Some of them may be folded up, or anyway, they're not big and clumsy like this thing.
So you buy a lot of umbrellas, is that right?
No, not particularly. I buy, and I'm 53 years old. You collect a lot of stuff in that particular time. Umbrellas are not a particular hobby of mine. It's just that over the years, although God knows it may seem that it is.
Let me ask you this, my final question, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Witt, what do you think an umbrella is used for? Is it used to keep the sun off you, the rain off you, just to carry it along with you to match your top coat or something?
Well, an umbrella, I'm sure, can be used for many things. I'm sure you'd use it to keep the rain off, keep the sun off, In this case, you can use it to, as I did, for that purpose that I named.
And why are you using it today? Why did you come to Washington today with the umbrella? For what purpose?
Why did I?
Yeah.
Because I was subpoenaed.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Fithian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, for the record, I would like to ask permission of the chair to write a two-page historical memorandum on the tenure of Ambassador Kennedy in England and the Neville Chamberlain episode. I'm afraid that perhaps some might not get the clear significance of the umbrella as the symbol. For Ambassador Kennedy took a rather merciless treatment subsequent to his placing his own firm belief in Neville Chamberlain's policies. These, of course, came in great disrepute after Winston Churchill became Prime Minister and after the Munich conference broke down. And I think it might be helpful if at this point in the record we had a somewhat clearer historical explanation than we have, and I won't burden you with it now, but I would like permission to write such.
We'd certainly be happy to take advantage of the gentleman's expertise in the area of history and have the committee afford the benefit of such a document.
It is very hard 30 years hence, I believe, for people to understand how much a symbol the umbrella of Neville Chamberlain became. Mr. Witt, in 1963, you said you were a conservative and you didn't care much for liberal policies and you didn't care much for liberal politicians. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you remember what groups or organizations you belonged to in 1963?
None.
No organized, even any civic organizations or civic clubs?
At that time, no.
Have you ever belonged to organizations such as the White Citizens Council or
No.
the Ku Klux Klan or
No. I'm just not a joiner of organizations in general. I'm certainly not a joiner of organizations either to the left or the right.
And I just wanted to make sure, I thank Mr. Devine for the questions on the shots, but you really at this date, even after thinking about all this time and try to reconstruct it mentally, as I'm sure you must have many times, you can't help the committee at all as to either the direction the shots came from or the number of shots fired.
No, I really can't. The only thing that I can recall is the rapid fire, their close spacing.
I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
The time of the gentleman has expired. Anyone else seeking recognition? Okay. Gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. McKinney.
Mr. Witt, it's a pleasure to see you in person. I know it's not a pleasure for you to be here, and I really don't blame you, but I've been looking at that picture for so many years that it's a pleasure to see you in person. I just want to go over briefly. You did hear gunfire, correct? And you say several shots in rapid succession.
Yes.
You really had no feeling at the time as to from what direction they came from?
No, sir. I really can't place them at any particular place.
You mentioned a policeman standing up behind you on the grassy knoll with a gun, I guess, sort of pointed up this way. Did you notice any massive or more than normal activity of, say, police or anyone running around, say, looking for people? Or as if they were looking for people?
No, not that I recall.
You were staring as I'd never disagree with my colleagues on this committee, particularly the member from the District of Columbia, since I'm one of his most ardent supporters. But I think you have a rather stunned look on your face in that picture in the lower right-hand corner. You're just sort of staring across the street, right? So that you really weren't spending much time. You've testified you didn't really even look at the guy next to you.
Yes, this is correct. And One of the gentlemen up there described me as being very cool. I'm afraid he was...
Well, I think your jaw's a little low in that picture to look cool. It looks to me like you're sort of...
I was definitely stunned. This is why that some things I don't remember. The things that I do remember are the things where there was repetition. The multiple shots, this person repeating themselves, the woman repeating herself, naturally the activity of the cars, that sticks with me. If I said anything to the person sitting to my right, I don't recall what it was.
One of the strange things about this assassination is that a few people write a few words about the picket fence or the retaining wall, and this committee's had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to try and find out what went on. They made a lot of money out of a few words, and we're spending money trying to figure out whether what they said was true or not. Did you notice anyone or anything going on by the picket fence or by the retaining wall in Dealey Plaza, which up at the top of the grassy knoll? Did you see anyone peering over the fence or jumping over the fence or chasing anyone, or did you see anything or hear anything from that particular area?
No, sir, I did not, because at no point was I ever facing that direction.
Since that area, though, was quite close to you in comparison to the book depository, do you feel in your own mind that if a shot had come from the quote-unquote grassy knoll, picket fence, retaining wall area, that you would have been aware of where that shot had been come from? As in general, you were not aware of where any of the shots came from, but that area was quite close to you.
I don't know if I would have been aware of a shot that would have come from the area that you mentioned or not.
It's an unfair question because it asks for an assumption, and I apologize for that. I know that I'm not a lawyer, so I'm allowed to get away with that sort of thing. Did you notice the reaction or the movement or anything else of any of the other eyewitnesses, either across the street where you were sort of staring off or around you?
No, sir, I did not.
In fact, you really didn't even turn around and look at the guy who sat down next to you.
No, no, sir, I didn't.
You stated earlier, so I suppose this is a redundant question, that you did not look at the picket fence or at the retaining wall. So obviously, if I ask you, did you observe anyone behind them, it's a slight redundancy, but did you observe at any time anyone wandering around up behind those fences or walls, say before you opened the umbrella or before you left the grassy knoll or while you were walking down or any of that?
No, sir, I did not. Of course, the only time that I would have looked in that direction, if I even looked at all, would be when I was walking out into the middle of this grassy area. At no other time would I, because it would have been to I guess to either my back or my side. I really don't know how it's laid out down there. The picket fence and that sort of thing, I don't even know where it is.
I really think this is very unfair for me to do this to you because I have trouble summarizing my own thoughts, but I would like to, if I could, summarize what I think you have said, and then I guess just get you to agree with me or not. That is that you were sitting there waiting for the president to come by in an area where you were somewhat by yourself so that you could be noticed, so that you could brandish the umbrella. As you opened the umbrella, your visibility of the scene was obstructed. When you held the umbrella up, you became aware that something, and something pretty bad, had happened. You had heard shots, you had seen a Secret Service man leap onto the back of the other car, you had seen the pink blur, as we recognize it now, Mrs. Kennedy sort of scrambling on the back of the car. You closed the umbrella, sat down, dropped the umbrella on the sidewalk, and realized that what had started out as quote-unquote a joke for you had somehow or other, and you knew not how, turned into just something that hadn't worked. It was sour. Is that a pretty fair summary?
Yes, that's correct. I think that sums it up.
Mr. Witt, I thank you very much for coming. I know that you are an extremely private person and that this has been an extremely painful situation for both you and your family. And I, for one, who feels quite often that my family's privacy gets invaded for no good reason, sympathize with you and admire your being here and your willingness to answer questions that have been hanging around for about 15 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Edgar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I've been listening to Mr. McKinney's conversation with you about your recollection, I'm reminded of the fact that my wife just a few weeks ago witnessed a very tragic accident, and her first impression or expression was of shock when she saw the accident occur. But after the shock subsided, she had the wits to go and say to the policeman who eventually arrived that she would be willing to act as a witness, given whatever testimony she could about who was or who was not involved and exactly how the accident occurred for purposes of later investigations. Did it ever occur to you, as someone who literally sat down in front of where the president was assassinated, that you might have a bit or a piece of evidence that might make a contribution to the authorities looking into the death of President Kennedy?
I don't really know if this ever occurred to me or not. Had it occurred to me, I seriously doubt that I would have gone forward to volunteer any information.
Were you frightened? Were you frightened about the fact that you had deliberately set out to cause a scene or an embarrassment to the president?
Not frightened as such, but at that time there was a great deal of what I would have to describe as hysteria in the Dallas area about the president being killed. It could have been extremely unwise for me to have volunteered and became known at that time. It could have been dangerous to me or my family.
In what way would you have suspected it could have been dangerous to you or your family?
Well, you would kind of have had to live in the city to be aware of how things were then. In that everyone was, I really wouldn't know how to describe it. I really don't know, but nevertheless, I would say that I would not have made it known.
Were you afraid to go privately to the Dallas Police Department and share the information of what you saw with a police officer in the privacy of a room at the police station?
Oh, I really don't know. I think that I really think that if I had any real thought on this, and I can't recall one way or the other, it would be my guess that my line of thinking was that I really had nothing to offer other than just having done a foolish thing.
But you were concerned about the foolishness of your act, or were you concerned about the retribution that might come to you?
I don't know what my line of thinking is. It could have been both.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you've come forward now in response to the picture that we've shown. It's difficult this many years later to piece together all of the pieces of what happened in Dealey Plaza, and you do have a contribution to make, as has been exhibited by your presence here today. And I hope that others who may witness serious events like this will stop and think about making a contribution by notifying whatever authorities are there what they saw, even if it isn't very important to them or if it looks insignificant to them. It may play a part in unraveling a very complicated story. I yield back the balance of my time.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Sawyer.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to request that when the gentleman from Indiana submits his historical analysis of the attribution of the umbrellas assembled in Neville Chamberlain and the senior Mr. Joseph Kennedy, who was then ambassador to the Court of St. James, that I be allowed to submit a one-pager on the subject of Scotch.
Jim, to say just for the benefit of the witness more than anyone else, the sensitivity of the late President Kennedy on this point stems as much as any other, not only because of the close family relationship, but because he was secretary to his father, the ambassador, during a part of that tenure. And I think it was all the more a kind of a personal thing. And he went on, of course, to write the award-winning thesis at Harvard entitled While England Slept. And a lot of people believe that that was, again, a sort of his own trying to wrestle with this bad taste that was left in the mouth of the American people because of Ambassador Kennedy's interpretation of the German-British pact at Munich.
I have nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from District of Columbia, Mr. Fontroy.
Mr. Chairman, I simply have one more question for Mr. Witt. Mr. Witt, you have indicated that you have learned over these years now that the Umbrella Man was considered a factor, that even someone has suggested that the umbrella was a gun and that it may have been a signal. You may want also to know, and therefore to help us, that the person sitting beside you has been alleged to have been a Cuban, and that other pictures taken in the plaza suggested that he may have been talking on a two-way radio while he was sitting beside you. And it would be of great interest to us to identify who that person sitting beside you was. And for that reason, I simply ask, is there anything that you can recall about the person that would enable us to find him, even as we found you, because your story certainly sounds plausible?
I wish that I could give you more information, but I'm sorry I can't. Now, as for him talking on a
two-way radio,
a two-way radio while sitting beside me, I feel sure that I would have been aware of that, even though I was stunned and didn't, and I don't recall ever looking directly at the man. But I believe that anyone who was sitting that close, as the picture shows it, I feel sure that I would have known if they were holding, because those walkie-talkie things are fairly large. They're
Sure.
certainly bigger than a person's hand. I feel like that I would have remembered that. I can't say with 100% certainty that I would have remembered that, but somehow I just feel like that I would have. One thing that I would, there are two things in having been shown these pictures where my memory was different from what the picture showed. Number one, the couple that were covering the children, I remembered them as being up close to me, as being fairly close, because I looked, you know, I saw them doing this, and in later years I've thought how ridiculous it was of me standing up there with gunfire going on, standing there like a tourist, and here was these people had the presence of mind to cover these children. The other thing is in my memory, I don't remember a person sitting that close to me. The person that I remember is saying what he did and repeating it a number of times. I don't remember having been that close. I don't know if these pictures are taken at an angle that makes it look like that, or if my memory is playing tricks on me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Devine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one question for the purposes of the record, Mr. Witt. This appears to have been somewhat of an impulsive act on your part. I was wondering, is there anything in your history that you have been a demonstrator or a picketer or engaged in symbolic acts in the past, or is this just a single incident in your life that you wish it hadn't happened?
Never before. This was the only time. True, I wish that it had not happened. I am not a person who wants to bring himself into notice, and I think this very fact is what put me down there in that area, in this street that I went down. There was all of these people. Had I broke out this big oversized umbrella, there would have been people standing on either side of me and maybe questioning what the heck was I doing. By continuing my little walk, I don't know how long I continued to maintain the idea that I was going to do this, but I have the feeling that when I was headed back in the direction of where I work, that I saw this area down there and an open space where there were not all this many people around. So I would think it would be my particular personality of not wanting to be questioned by people or putting on a show in front of people that led me into that particular location.
But for the record, this is the first and probably